And then there's the Chinese. This was already one of the fastest aging societies in the historical record. And 2 months ago, the Chinese updated the data. They've had a 70% drop in the birth rate since just 2017. That tells me two things. Number one, China will cease to be a coherent economic power, a coherent nation state this decade. And the Han ethnicity will probably vanish from the world this century. It could happen a lot faster because the Shanghai Academy of Sciences, all the brainiacs who are responsible for interpreting the data are like, even the new data is wrong. We've overcounted the population by over 100 million people, and these yellow bars probably don't even exist. Now, that has obviously a whole boatload of complications and consequences. Let's go through them. Let's start with consumption. This is vehicular miles traveled. They're down to 40% of their peak. Now, obviously, COVID is part of that. But in the 6 months since COVID lockdowns ended, they haven't picked up at all. Why? Demographics. The people who are most likely to be mobile are people in their 20s. And we're now discovering that over the course of the last 6 years, they've run out. Or you can look at their purchasing power. Here's vehicle sales. Now, whenever a country modernizes in the current age, everybody wants the same four things. They want a smartphone, they want a refrigerator, they want climate control, typically AC, and they want a car. The red line here is the 12-month moving average. You'll notice not only have they not recovered to pre-COVID levels, they peaked a year and a half before COVID. Now, if you think back on the last 5-6 years, a lot of it has gone down. We've had the Trump administration, which was like living inside of a bullhorn. We had COVID, which scrambled all the data, even if everyone was being conscientious about it, which no one was. China has disappeared into a cult of personality. And the information that we normally would be able to assess either hasn't been there or has been overshadowed. But now that COVID's behind us and the Trump administration is behind us, we're getting a kind of a look under everybody's hood. And we're discovering in the last 5-6 years, we've hit a lot of turning points that we kind of missed. In the case of China, they now say that the Chinese population peaked last year. But as they're interpreting the data, 5 years on, they're discovering actually that probably happened 12 years ago. They found out that the American population became younger than the average Chinese citizen probably 4 years ago. Turns out that was probably back in 2006. India surpassed China to become the largest population this year. That probably happened in 2014. We're finally getting a kind of a clear look, and we've missed China's peak. And it's not that we're at a plateau, it's we're already on the backside of that mountain. And it's only going to accelerate, because if you have had a 70% drop in the birth rate, you are looking at national oblivion. Now, how do you get something like this to grow if there's no consumption? Well, you've got three types of economic growth. Your first one's consumption-led. That's the United States. That's Mexico. The second one is export-led. That's Germany. That's Korea. And the third one is investment-led. You basically throw money to build infrastructure, to build industrial plant. And that activity of the expansion is what drives the system. And that has always been China's #1 source of growth. Most of it is driven by debt. And this is a debt graphic. So the orange line, that's corporate, the gray line is government, and the blue is household. I need to put this all in perspective because this doesn't look very dramatic, does it? Well, #1, let's look at corporate because that's the biggest chunk. Back at the beginning of this data in 2006, that was already more debt in absolute terms, not relative, absolute terms than the entire American corporate world, and it then doubled. Second, this is in percent of GDP. So if the Chinese have been having 5 to 10% growth a year, that means the debt has been going up by 10 to 20% a year. So the absolute numbers are much bigger than this suggests. Third, the government debt, that's a bigger build than Trump, that's a bigger build than Obama. And it's all local debt. You know, say what you will about the federal government's debt program. Is it responsible? No. But they have the Fed to back them out, bail them out if they need to. because ultimately federal debt is backed by the currency. We're the global currency. The Federal Reserve can change the money supply with a click of a button. You can't do that if it's Chicago. And so they've added $10.5 trillion of local debt in 15 years, which is about 3 times what our total local debt exposure is. And then finally, there's households. Now, their household debt has now surpassed US household debt. But the crazy thing is that's the good news. You guys been watching what's been happening with real estate in China lately? Oh my God. Okay, so ghost cities, we've all heard about them. The red circles are where no one lives in a ghost city. And the orange circles are where governments have moved in, but no one has followed. Now, 2 things from this. Number 1, most of the real estate was paid for with cash. It was not lent. It's owned outright. When you have an investment-led system that distorts the capital structure so much, people are desperate to find ways to preserve and grow their money. The Chinese government prevents people from sending money abroad, so they have to find something at home. They usually go for real estate. So for your average Chinese citizen, over 85% of their savings is in some sort of real estate function. Here's the crazy part. The overbuild in subprime was 3 to 4% of the housing stock in the United States, and we know how that felt. The overbuild in China is 100 to 200%. They have enough spare condos to house somewhere between 1.5 and 3 billion people. The market value of product in that sort of environment, it's probably 10 to 20% of what they paid for it. So when this goes down, it's not so much that it's a financial hit to the country, no, because it's not on the debt sheet, but it destroys the sum total of the population's life savings. So on top of everything else that the Chinese have going on, you're looking at 1.3 billion people who are probably going to be a little upset in the not too distant future. And that's assuming there's not a war, which there probably will be. This is an energy flow graphic. So the green bars on the left, those are net oil exports. The red on the right are net oil imports. You'll notice how conveniently close together they are. It's about a 5,500 to 7,000 mile sail from the Persian Gulf energy fields to the Northeast Asians based on where you start and where you stop. Now, this route is how everything is shipped right now. The coastal route, it's the short route. The Chinese have dozens of weapon systems that can interfere with that route. So if we get into a shooting war because of something with the Iranians or the Saudis, or let's say Russian energy goes offline and prices go up, there's not enough left for everybody, you get a roving naval war between the Japanese and the Chinese, the tankers won't use that route. They'll take this longer route that avoids the Chinese coast. China has a big navy, 600 ships, twice ours, but about 2/3 of those vessels would fit in this room. Not at the same time, don't be dumb. The point is they don't have range. Only about 8 to 10% of those ships can sail more than 1,000 miles without a refuel, and that 1,000-mile range assumes that they're going slow in a straight line to save fuel, not that they're like dodging missiles. The Chinese cannot project power. They can't control their own sea lanes. They are utterly dependent upon freedom of the seas in order to function. And so if we do get a shooting war, the energy stops, their entire transport system shuts down, the natural gas that they import in liquefied form goes away, their chemical sector dies the next day, and China will disassociate within a year. And since they import 80% of the stuff they use to grow their own food, we also get a famine that kills hundreds of millions of people within 2 years.